All right. Well, we have, looks like we have people in. Let's get started. We have about 14 people in, and people will be joining us as we go along. And welcome to the session on aviation. And we're excited to have everyone here. I'm Gregg Foster. I'm Executive Director of the Redwood Region Economic Development Commission. We are the sponsor of Fly Humboldt, which is the Air Service Development Program for the County of Humboldt. We've been doing that since about 2004. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We're joined by Adam Goldstein, and Adam is is an entrepreneur, a pilot, a remote worker, all around decent fella from what I've found in our interactions over the last week or so. He's familiar with the North Coast as he owns a home in Crescent City and has flown to airports in both Del Norte and Humboldt counties. He founded a company called HipMonk, which was the air travel meta search engine, and is the founder of Flight Penguin, which says it's time to put kayak on ice. So we'll go that. He went to a little school on the East Coast called MIT. I think I've heard of it. And so Adam's going to be talking about his perspective. And we're also joined by Diana Rios. And Diana is the coordinator with the Office of Economic Development in Humboldt County. And she's heading up Project Soar. Project Soar is a partnership between the Economic Development Office and the County Department of Aviation to help create a financially independent airport and enhance airport operations. The program will allow the airport to develop new air service routes, obtain new commercial tenants, and develop airport parcels for commercial, industrial, and retail use. And what we want to try to do today is, well, and I will say we had another, and this is the irony of the day, I suspect. We have our other panelist was going to be Cody Roggatz, who is the Director of Aviation for the County of Humboldt. So he's responsible for not only for the commercial aviation airport, but also the other 5 general aviation airports. But believe it or not, Cody's had problems with flights today. So he's stuck in the air somewhere and unable to participate. So we're gonna do our parts, and then we'll probably try to fill in where we can for him. And going forward. But that's, hey, when you're in aviation and air travel, you have to be flexible, right? Sometimes you are eating dinner in the restaurant at 6 in the morning and that just happens. So our goal today is to sort of provide you with a background and some opportunities around the nexus between economic development and aviation. Something that we have been doing a lot here in Humboldt, and I think up in Del Norte. I'm less familiar with Mendocino, so if there's anyone from Mendocino here, we certainly would love you to chime in and talk about that. But what I would like to do before we go into presentations really is just get a sense of who's in the room. So, which is a little bit difficult on this in this format, but if you want to just put in the chat, what county you're from, your name and organization, and then maybe a question that you'd like to learn today or why you're here today. And then that way we can be responsive and reflexive and be able to make sure that we have your needs met. So go ahead and type that in the chat, or if you want to, feel free to request access up at the top of your screen there. You can get audio and video sharing, and you can join in with us. Diana keeps popping in and out, so that might be an issue with with her presentation later. But anyway, and before I go right in, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do here in Humboldt County, and then we're going to toss it over to Adam, who really I think has a great perspective as really kind of a part of our target market for economic development and aviation. So I know when he's talking, I certainly will be listening because I want to learn from him as part of our market research and what we can do next to really leverage our infrastructure asset and our airports here to get the folks like him investing their time and efforts in Humboldt County. But and we're going to throw around terms today sometimes, and if you don't understand what we're talking about, feel free to put in the chat or raise your hand or whatever, and we can talk about what we mean if we throw out an acronym or a term that's not familiar with you, because I know not everyone here is a aviation expert or even enthusiast necessarily, but there's a lot of terminology that can be confusing. But in general, what we're going to talk today a little bit about is both what we call commercial aviation, and it's kind of a false way to the names aren't great, right? Because general aviation can also be commercial. But when I say commercial aviation, if I use that term, I'm really talking about passenger commercial scheduled service aviation, the things you see when you get on the plane and go, United, Southwest, AHA, Avelo, that kind of thing. And then there's general aviation, which again is a terrible term really in the industry, but it really talks about everything else. And that can be, emergency services, scheduled package services, charters, all this other stuff that doesn't fit within that sort of traditional legacy carrier or even small carrier commercial aviation term. So if we talk about that way, that's the general distinction. So are there any questions before we start sessions? Because I'm going to keep talking, giving a little background on economic development in here, and then I'll toss it over to Adam. Any questions? Any hands up? Nope. All right. So why is our organization, and in my opinion, why should economic development be involved in aviation? Well, really, it's the basics of economic development, right? And we always talk about economic development and business development about direct and indirect and induced impacts of our efforts and our resources and our investments, right? And so the direct impact would be, the jobs, the work that occurs on an airport operators, FBOs, acronym, fixed base operators. Those are the companies that might run an airport or run a general aviation airport, provide services, that sort of thing. Air carriers, freight haulers, concessionaires, all that kind of occurs right on the airport. And there is a direct impact. When we add service here in commercial service, jobs are created at the airport because they need people to service those aircraft, check people in and out and all that. Then there's the indirect impact, which is associated with the users of the airport, right? These include corporate users, public users, government agencies, aviation and non-aviation businesses. And, they pay fees and charges. And of course, they're spending money at the airport or adjacent to it. So there's that sort of indirect impact. And then the third piece is the induced impact. And that really is the economic activity that is generated from having that asset and investing in that asset and the activity there. And that, may be, people that, related employment, payroll, employee expenditures, employer expenditures, so that's we in the industry and the economic development talk about the multiplier effect, and so that's what this is really about. How does the economic activity that occurs on or adjacent to an airport really create economic activity more broadly, and support that, and I had a point, but I'll make the point later. It fits better later in my discussion. But so REDEC got really involved in that, and quite honestly, and I will say that I remember back, and what really kind of formulated our interest in aviation was about 20 years ago. I was attending a conference in San Diego, and the topics, the conference session I was at was about technology incubators that were being sponsored by and supported by the University of California, San Diego. And the moderator was a editor of the San Diego Business Journal. And afterwards, I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, I'm from Humboldt County. Do you have the question that we always ask, do you know where that is? And B, the second question was, you're talking about these industries that are graduating out of these tech incubators. Again, this is 20 years ago. And they're going to be looking for a place to land. What does Humboldt County offer, or what could Humboldt County offer?" And he was familiar with our county, to these folks. And he says, "I want to know only two questions." And I said, "Okay." He says, "How good is your air service and how good is your broadband?" And it was great because it gave me a 20-year career basically working on those two things, because quite honestly, neither were great here at the time. We did have air service. We had a couple airlines, three actually at the time. Oh no, two at the time, Alaska. And so we had decent air service. It wasn't super good, but we had good connections to San Francisco, and then we were flying up to Portland, and we hadn't been doing LAX yet. So so we had a few connections. We had a couple airlines, but we didn't even have fiber up here, and so we had a real problem. But basically what he's saying is, and I kind of went to him with this a naivete, which is like, we have a great quality of life and our real estate is relatively cheap, which is sort of what we led with up here in economic development back then. And he's like, well, that's great. That's, makes you a nice place to visit, but it's not really conducive to the types of industries that we're talking about here to come to you, because the barriers to actually conducting business is going to be too large. So we really started to focus on that. And of course, then we started looking at, it's basic infrastructure, right? It's transportation infrastructure, which is really critical for us up here because we're so far away from places. And quite honestly, there are times when you can't drive in and out of here. So, so we have that added resource that allows us to be remote but not isolated, which is the term I like to use about us. It's okay to be remote, but it's not okay to be isolated if your goal is to create a thriving economy. And we began talking to businesses. Interestingly, I moved back here in 1991 as a consultant, as a tender young man, moving back to Humboldt County. And I would not have been able to do that had we not had an airport, because probably 95% of our work was outside of Humboldt County. And so we were on planes all the time. And this is pre-internet. So, we face-to-face and fax machines was really the way to go, and phone calls, I guess. And so it really is what made our little company exist, if not succeed and thrive. So that's kind of where we're going. So, we and I won't go through the whole history of Fly Humboldt. We can do that later if you have some questions. But we became really active in this sort of new field called air service development. And that field has really only been around 21 years. And that is the actual recruiting of airlines, really to go to, for the most part, it's smaller airports, right? The big airports, the hubs don't really have a huge difficulty attracting service, although they do support like international flights in certain places. But it's really a nationwide competition to get air service into airports like ours. And that's one of the myths that I want to dispel today. And I worked hard. I think we've all worked hard in Humboldt County to dispel, is that air service really is a business recruitment strategy and a business retention strategy. A lot of people think it's sort of like, and we get these all the time. In fact, I was on LinkedIn this morning, and one of my friends who's an air service director in another airport was saying, "Oh, we got this flight's being announced," and someone said, "Well, why don't you add this instead?" And that's not up to the airports. The airports really, and especially our airports, are really just big real estate enterprises that offer a particular service, and that service in this case is an airport terminal and runways and all that stuff. But there is, since deregulation, there is no obligation for any airline to service any airport. And so, they're there for one reason and one reason only: to make money. And so when we go and do the pitch, our goal, we have to demonstrate to them and convince them, quite honestly, is that when they come into a market, they're going to make money. And we do some pretty detailed market studies, and I can show you a copy of one later after at the end. And we do this over and over and over again. And so really the way that works is we go to these airline recruiting conferences, which is sort of a new industry that's sprung up. And they're speed dating. You get 20 minutes, a rigid 20 minutes in front of your airlines, and you make your pitches. And so you're either doing one of two things or one of three things: trying to convince a new airline to come into your market and add new service, convince an existing airline here to add something new, or you're having a conversation where you're not asking them for anything new, but what you're really doing is checking in to see how business is working for them in your airport, because once they're here, your responsibility really kind of increases, not decreases, because the airport and the community need to make sure that people are using that service for them to stay. And especially when you're dealing with the larger airlines, they're not going to make a lot of investment in their small airport to do that. We are, from a traffic and revenue standpoint for the legacy airlines, we have American and United here. I would say we're a rounding error, but I don't know that we amount to that much. And so their goal is to, add these to their network, get people flying, and they want to see, and they look at this constantly, how full the planes are and what the average fare is. And we track that as well so that we can kind of be ahead of the curve in talking to them. Interestingly, in the last two airlines that we're adding, one's a brand new startup and one's a new brand of an existing regional carrier. It's a much different kind of relationship with them. They are spending money. We have a much more direct relationship with them in terms of marketing and putting programs and services in the market, because they're small and they're new. For both of those airlines, we were in the first round of destinations as they started up. And so that's actually kind of fun in a way, because you feel like you're really part of the airline and working with them. And they're really leisure travel airlines. And so much of historically what's gone on with airlines is, business travel was the core. Leisure travel is nice. Leisure is very elastic. It goes up and down, blah, blah, blah. It's seasonal. With COVID, though, we've seen a lot more interest in, and it's a real change in the almost 20 years that we've been doing it here, a real change in how they view our airport. And so instead of asking about what kind of passengers can you provide us as an origin, actually, and it's interesting, American, when they approached us, and then the other two airlines are talking about us as a destination. So that really changes what we need to do in some ways, which is we need to actually be reaching out into those destination markets and encouraging passengers to come here. We do, on average, about 40 to 50% of our air traffic is considered visitors, which is data we can get from their airline tickets, get metadata. We can't see exactly the individuals, of course, but we do know where they're flying from, if they live in our market area or not, how much they paid, how many there are, and that goes by month. So that's really good. So right now our challenge from economic development is on that commercial side really is to be a retention focus, make sure that all that new service we just put in really succeeds. And coming out of COVID, it's really disrupted the industry, of course. I mean, the industry dropped 97% in a month. That it was, you want to talk about panicky calls. Our airline calls in March and April last year were just like, we would get on Zoom and just sort of stare at each other on the screen. It's like, what do we do? But it's disrupted the industry, and that's actually worked to our benefit, because there was so much equipment and so many pilots and everything available that we were able to really get put into the rebuilt network. One thing that we haven't done enough of here in economic development is really focus on the general aviation. And County of Humboldt has 6 airports, as I mentioned, and 5 are pure general aviation, and one's general aviation and commercial service airport. And there's a whole segment of business around that we really need to, I think, start focusing more on. How do we boost the general aviation part of our system here to create that kind of travel, that kind of investment from business? So that's our next big challenge, I think. We have 2 challenges for an economic development here. One, retain what we've got. We do want to add a flight to Seattle or Portland, and we're working on that. And then really start to focus on the general aviation. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Adam, because he's really probably certainly more experienced in the general aviation realm than I am, because he's a user. And hear a little bit about his experience and what he's worked both parts of the industry, interestingly, and we can hear a little bit more about what he thinks about this. And again, if you have any questions as we go along, please just put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we will make sure you get them answered. Adam, take it away.
Thank you, Gregg. I want to make sure you can hear me Cool.
Sounds
Great.
good.
Well, I'm really excited to be here today. This combines all of my interests in one, aviation, economic development, flying into beautiful places in the North Coast of California. It's just like too good to turn down. I first got exposed, interestingly, to the North Coast of California because I was running a travel startup based in San Francisco called Hipmunk. And I was reading the blog of all of the airlines' routes that were being added and removed. And I saw that there was a flight that was going to be ending from San Francisco to Crescent City. And I had no idea where that was. I mean, I'd lived in San Francisco for years at that point, but I'd never heard of Crescent City. So I looked it up on a map. I was, wait a second, Crescent City's in California. How have I never come across this place? So I decided to catch one of the very last flights on United Express from San Francisco to Crescent City. On the way back, it actually stopped in Arcata. So one of the shortest flights I've ever seen from Crescent City to Arcata. And I fell in love with the North Coast region. And when I sold my company, the first thing I did was I bought a house in Crescent City, walking distance from the airport. And that was important to me because I'm also a pilot. Got my license a couple of years ago. I've flown all across North America and back. I've landed at Crescent City and Arcata. And I really wanted to be able to be close to the airport. And so, while Gregg talks a lot about Humboldt, I think I probably bring more of a Del Norte perspective, though I've also, flown plenty commercial into Arcata and absolutely love the growth of commercial service there. So, I also work in technology. I've invested in more than 50 technology companies in software and biology and hardware as well. And I've been watching the trend that's been taking place really over the last 20 years or so, but especially over the last 2 years, where more and more companies, and especially technology companies, are saying, you know what? We actually don't need our employees in the office every day. We don't even necessarily need them in the office every week. I mean, we don't necessarily even need them in the office ever. I kicked off a new project called Flight Penguin, which is kind of a successor to my previous startup. And we hired someone to run it. We've never met face to face. He's been working for me for 4 months. That's the new normal. So this opens up a lot of potential for areas that have a lot of natural attractions, a relatively low cost of living, and proximity to major metro areas. And I think proximity can be defined in two ways. One is the driving distance. The other is the total travel time, including a flight. Now, to give you a perspective on this, I have a place in San Francisco and a place in Crescent City. I can take BART, the local subway, from my place in San Francisco to Oakland Airport, fly up to Crescent City, and walk to my house, door to door, 3 hours. That's less time than it would take for me to drive from San Francisco to, for example, Lake Tahoe, especially on a holiday weekend or something. So in terms of actual travel time, the North Coast of California is actually closer to the Bay Area than places people typically think of as nearby kind of commuter areas like, Sacramento or Tahoe or, places like that. Maybe even certain parts of Napa. It's actually closer to fly to the North Coast and rent a car or take a taxi than it is to drive all the way on through the crazy traffic in the Bay Area. So that's a great opportunity for this region. And the reason is because even though the most forward-thinking companies are letting their employees work from anywhere, most companies still are kind of uneasy with the idea of a fully remote workforce. They would like for their employees to come into the office maybe once a week, maybe a few days a month, something like that, so that they still get some face time. And if you're going to be commuting into, let's just say, the tech capital of the US, tech capital of the world, which is the Bay Area, probably if you're going to be doing that every week, you want it to be a short trip. So I think that opens up a lot of opportunity in the North Coast. And there's two other areas that I think demonstrate the potential of this really well. The first is Bend, Oregon. So Bend was kind of a depressed area after the end of the logging industry, but they did have a direct flight to the Bay Area, to SFO every day. And over time, a bunch of people from the Bay said, you know what, I don't need to be in the office every single day. And I love the natural beauty in Bend. So I'm going to move there and I'm going to fly into work, once a week, just a day trip. And over time, those people just said, I want to start my own company, or, I just want to live in Bend full time. And it's grown tremendously as a city, become a very desirable sort of secondary tech center. And the air service has grown, and it's opened up even more possibilities for people to live there and work in other places. So it's kind of a flywheel, right? At first, it was that Bay Area connection, people starting to move but still commuting, then people staying put in Bend, starting their own businesses there, their own tech companies, their own startups. And then the population growing, the business opportunities growing, jobs growing, then that creating more demand for air travel to other regions, and then making it even more of a destination. And now there's a whole ecosystem of technology in Bend that wasn't there, 10 or 15 years ago in the same way. A more recent example of this is San Luis Obispo, and this is a very relevant example given the developments that are happening in education, higher education in California. So San Luis Obispo has always had Cal Poly, but it didn't really have much of a tech center. Over time, though, the remote work, people started moving from the Bay Area. They said, this is a gorgeous area, relatively low cost of living, easy commute to the Bay. And it is drivable, but the flight makes it really easy. And then it sort of just became its own little flywheel. And now you can fly from San Luis Obispo all over the place to Texas. It's crazy. And it just keeps growing, more and more demand. So I see the same potential for the North Coast. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I bought a house there. I think there's a lot of opportunity economically. And I think that aviation feeds into that. It starts as a way to get people to the jobs they already have. But over time, as people start to move and start to fall in love with the area, it creates the opportunity for them to create new businesses in the North Coast that then create new jobs there, increase the demand for more people to come and work there, more people with a lot of talent and a lot of skills who just want a more beautiful, quieter, cheaper place to live than the hectic cities up and down the coast. And then it can grow from there. So that's my interest in why I was excited to speak on the panel this morning. And Gregg, I don't know if you want to have questions or if we want to talk about anything else in particular.
I'm going to see if we can get Diane reconnected here. Diana is going to talk a little bit about what is happening with Project Soar, but she's having, so it's not a great day for the economic development and county staff. Cody's in an aircraft somewhere after a 20-hour mega attempt to fly, and Diana's having some audio issues. But let me see if I can bring her on here. Talk a little bit about the economic developments efforts in Aviation Humboldt. So can you hear us? She cannot hear me. Can you?
Not looking good.
Yep, she's gone. Okay, well, I'll talk a little bit about Project Soar, which I think is kind of interesting, and then we can take questions. And Yuma, great question there too. And I'll mention that Humboldt State thing in just a minute. But Project Soar really is the first time where the county of Humboldt. Okay, Scott, if you Scott Adair, if you try to request access to your, you can see a button there that says request access, and then I can let you in, and maybe we can get Diana that way. And Scott is Diana's boss, and can talk about Project Soar as well. But it really is a something that's just started, where the county of Humboldt has made a decision, I think a wise one, to dedicate resources out of the Economic Development Office to support growth and development in the airport and aviation system. And so that while they keep doing that, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat. Go ahead, Adam.
I can just sort of weigh in. I'm just looking up the so Gabrielle first mentioned about interest in tourism. So tourism is great, and I think this is one of the things that Gregg mentioned. We're already seeing increasingly national airlines are seeing the demand for people who want to visit the North Coast, who want to see the Redwoods. That's driving a lot of this, and that's good. It's good, but it's also not enough. And the reason is because it's seasonal. So when you want to create an infrastructure for economic development, you want to make sure that the flights are full year-round, that the airlines are making money year-round. And the reason for that is because if you're going to come to the area to work, you want to be able to get to your job year round. It doesn't do you any good if you can only fly to the Bay Area, or only fly to Seattle, or only fly to, Salt Lake City or wherever during the summer when the tourists are coming. So it's definitely an important piece of the story. And the tourism is great. And I mean, one thing that we can all think about is how do we increase tourism during the off season? That'll have the more consistent that the demand is, the more that'll give the airlines confidence to fly year round, the more that creates opportunities for people to, build companies in the North Coast region because they've got that year round infrastructure. So tourism is an important piece, but it's only a piece.
Exactly. I see Yuma has a question there about collaboration with HSU, and I was really excited as HSU, as many of you know, got the $500 million to convert to a polytechnic, which is, of course, what Adam was talking about being San Luis Obispo. And the other kind of interesting parallel with San Luis Obispo is they have a international fiber optic line that lands in San Luis Obispo, and we are currently building one. We being the company called Google, you might have heard of. And so they pulled the first mile of that fiber to create the connection into Humboldt, and now that ship's going to be flying all the way over. And so that's kind of exciting. We look at, and we actually share an air service consultant. So it's exciting to see that going on. But and relative to that, we had a conversation with the administration of Humboldt State. We pitched, we said, hey, we need to talk about creating aviation programming at Humboldt State. And what was really cool is the president of Humboldt State is a pilot, and the provost has run aviation programs at other colleges. So they said, absolutely, we need to do that. And so I got really excited about that, of course. And so we'll be, encouraging that. And I look forward to, the county and the aviation division, cooperating with them on that. So Adam,
Greg, I can weigh in on that. Yeah. So having gotten my license a couple of years ago and flown into both Arcata and Crescent City, I can say there's some pros and cons.
Right.
This is not the easiest place to learn to fly a plane, because when you're first learning, you have to fly when it's clear out. And as we all know, that's always a bit of a crapshoot in the North Coast. Now, the flip side of that is that for experienced pilots, there is no better training in the entire West Coast than flying into Arcata at minimum flyable cloud levels. Yeah. I have several friends who are pilots, and they do it to keep their skills sharp. They'll pick a day where the clouds are as low as they can be, and you can still legally land at Arcata. They'll pop out 200 or 300 feet above the runway and come right down, and they'll practice that because there's no better training. You can fly in a simulator all day long, but until you actually have the experience of clearing the mountains, coming in, and 10 seconds before touchdown, seeing the runway, it's all just an idea. So it's worthwhile to think about this, but I think it's important also to think about it for the right level of pilot. And personally, what I'd love to see, and this touches with what Greg was saying earlier, I'd love to see more general aviation coming in from other places to the North Coast. So think about pilots who are, getting ready to become commercial pilots, right? Getting ready to fly for the major airlines or to fly private jets. If we can create some incentive, some opportunity for them to do training on the North Coast, I think that would be wonderful. So I personally see the opportunity for first-time pilots, but probably an even bigger one for more advanced pilots. And those people tend to fly bigger planes and spend more money too.
Right. And that's awesome. And interestingly, that's of course where this airport in ACV started. Before there was even a McKinleyville, they built the airport there in World War II to help pilots train for takeoffs and landings in England. And then it was transitioned into a landing aids experiment station. So this is where ILS, instrument landing systems, were developed. We're in Humboldt County. The first commercial ILS, what they call a blind landing back in the day, was here. And it was a DC-3, but I can't remember which airline it was, but came in and did that. And if you go to the Fly Humboldt Facebook page, we have videos on there. That was a video that was made in the late 40s, early 50s of the development of ILS and what was called the FIDO system there. So one of the things they tested was creating a heat dome over the runway by burning diesel alongside both sides of the runway. A really horrible idea when you think about it, but they tried it here, and of course it didn't work. I mean, it worked, but it was hugely expensive and polluting and all that. But there's some really interesting flyovers, and you see the old facilities there and historical aircraft and flyovers of Humboldt County as they talk about how an instrument landing system works and all this stuff that they were developing here. So it's really kind of a historic airport in terms of the development of aviation as well. Maya asked the question, what does the maximum build out of flights look like for ACV? Well, you answer that. You can answer that a couple ways, right? From actual operations on a runway, you can do. I mean, if San Francisco does, they can do 30 an hour on one runway, so they'll do 60 an hour on their two runways. So the maximum amount in terms of runway capacity is unlimited in our view, because we'll never get to there. But it's all the other facilities. You got to park those planes. You got to get people in and out. You got to have them park their cars, and that really is the limiting factor. And of course, the market is the limiting factor. One of the criticisms we've heard as of late is, oh my gosh, the airport is as busy as it's ever been. We're turning into LAX. We're not, trust me. And some of these other things. And I pointed out to someone, because I have great data, right, that we actually, when this month, with our maximum amount of service, we will actually have 35 or 37% fewer landings and departures than we did in 2005. Why is that? Well, we were flying 30-seat and 74-seat aircraft at the time. And so while we were, our seat capacity has gone up 23, 25% over our peak in 2005, the number of departures is quite a bit less. Because you think about it, that one 737 that Avelo is flying is really carrying as many as 6 of the departures that the Embraer E120, which was our flagship plane here until 2015. And so we're flying those 189 seats, the 76 seat E175 and the 70 seat CR7. So we're carrying a lot of people and fewer departures and landings. And so that's what happens. The other thing that needs to happen to develop the retail commercial space at the airport, great question. And I would actually add at the end of that airports, Maya, because again, we have, the ones that also for the county that may have development potential are the general aviation airports at Murrayfield and at Rotorville, and maybe even Garberville. Those tend to be closer to population centers. And the other two are Dinsmore and Neyland, which just really don't have much commercial opportunity out there for development, but the others do. And the airport has a tremendous amount of real estate. There's a change in change in perspective, I think, going on in the county around these airports, and which was, before it was in public works, and does public works like to build and make things bigger and better? No, not necessarily. Their job is to manage the facility. And of course, the more use it gets, the more beat up it gets. So, Public Works, is not interested in necessarily creating a lot more work for themselves. And so it wasn't looked as an economic asset going forward now, or in the past. Now, going forward, I think it is, because obviously economic development is involved in that. The airport has a lot of real estate on what we call inside the fence, inside the airport proper. And again, as I said earlier, airports are really just big real estate operations. And if with that asset in the middle of an actual airport, right? But so much of what you see going on in airports now is not airport staff or airport companies. Some airports have not that many employees. It really, the ground handling, the plane servicing, everything else, even TSA in San Francisco is outsourced. So they've become big management companies, commercial operations. And so as the county is getting ready to redo its airport master plans, and I think that economic component needs to be in there. A number of years ago, the county commissioned a management study that really talks about that, and there's a strategic plan that was developed around that. So you really take a much more entrepreneurial commercial approach to that asset, and you begin to see a lot more opportunity. One other thing, or two other things, the we had a presentation not too long ago about the Google Fiber, and then there's another company called Vero Networks, which is building another fiber kind of loop around Humboldt Bay, and then going east and going up towards Trinidad eventually. Well, that fiber is going to connect with Google at the data center. It's going to go east, inland, and north, and that's going to run right by the airport. And of course, right adjacent to the airport is the airport business park, which is largely undeveloped. It's been there about 20 years, but it's got all these parcels available, ready for sale. And so, you know, what a great asset. You could say, hey, technology business or business that relies on technology. That's kind of a dated term. Every business is a technology business anymore, practically. You can build a suit on a parcel overlooking the ocean with a direct connection to fiber that goes to Asia, and you can walk to the airport. I mean, I don't know, Adam. What do you think? Is that a nice asset to sell there?
I think it is. I think there's a lot to say there. And Gregg, I'm curious if we want to jump back to some of the questions. I've got some thoughts on these, or if you want to share some more about the opportunities. Or can we hear Scott now?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Go for it, Scott. You want to talk about Soar?
I would. However, I was not originally intended to be on this panel. That honor was set aside for Diana Rios, who is new economic development coordinator hired by the county, a member of the economic development division team. And we're very excited to have Diana on the team and working on Project Soar. In fact, Diana's just over that cubicle right on the other side of that window there. So I'm going to ask, you can see Diana wave. Diana, come on in here. Not sure why we're having some technical difficulty with Diana's workstation, but we'll get that resolved soon. Project Soar is an MOU, or a memorandum of understanding, between two county agencies, the County Office of Economic Development and the County Department of Aviation, to collaborate together. There's Diana. To collaborate together on sourcing opportunities for airport revenues, hence the acronym SOAR, S-O-A-R. And it's a collaboration between the two agencies to make the airport more successful and to help the airport one day be a profit revenue generator for the county so that it can be independent. A lot of this comes in great part because of the work that Gregg has done in the community as well. So I really need to give some props to Gregg for his continued advocacy of the airport being able to operate financially independently and autonomously, so that it can continue to grow and better serve the community. So Diana is working on a number of issues or a number of projects and tasks related to Project Soar. So I'll turn that over to Diana.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody, for having me. Sorry, I'm loud in my own ear, so I'll take my earbuds out. I was listening from my desk. I dropped in the chat some of the projects that we're currently working on with Project Soar. Mind you, I did put the date in there that Project Soar actually didn't launch until August the 10th. And so we've been really busy in the last few months putting together some things that in all honesty, the aviation department just hasn't had a chance to do, or the staff time to do. And so we're putting out an RFP. We finalized our part of that yesterday, which felt really good. RFPs are hard and they're big. And so we'll get an RFP out for that restaurant cafe area. And it's an opportunity for local business owners that might be interested in applying for that RFP. It's tentatively scheduled to launch and be out in the community on the 5th, November 5th. And so we'll have it open for approximately a month, and then we'll be doing our site, we'll do a site tour, and we're going to do lots of different things at the airport in order for businesses to really evaluate themselves in that space, or envision themselves in that space. We're also looking at options and opportunities as we're doing some parking lot upgrades for ADA? What are the opportunities for mobile food trucks, mobile retail or concessions outside the airport? What is the space that's allowed? And what is the interest in that for community members, as well as business owners, as well as possibilities? So be on the lookout for that one. That one will come out sometime in December, possibly in January. We're going to focus on getting that cafe filled. And then we're doing an in-terminal marketing program. It's a income generator for the airport as an opportunity to let local, we have small businesses and we have big businesses, we have nonprofits, we have cannabis businesses that would like to start getting in the eyes of the people that are coming in and out of the airport. And Gregg will tell you in better numbers, but I want to say he said it was something like 1,000 people in and out of the airport a day, which is a lot more than some of our brick and mortar businesses on our main streets are getting access to, or eyes access to. So it's a really great opportunity for your business to promote on the marketing. That one will start at the end of November. We'll have that the marketing buy-in plan. My marketing plan will all be ready, and we'll be able to take your ads and start that in the end of November. And then some of the other things we're doing right now is we're currently we're in design right now for the new aviation website. It will have some of the features that Fly Humboldt has. It's going to have other features that Fly Humboldt doesn't have currently, but we'll also use Fly Humboldt as another great resource to partner with, and we appreciate all that Gregg's done. We're currently working with Lyft and Uber to lower the geofence around the perimeter of the airport, so that way we can have Uber and Lyft drivers or anybody that's in that field will have access. And that we're hopefully by the end of November we'll have that all done, and we can start serving people for Thanksgiving and for Christmas, the holiday season. So we're working on that diligently. And then the last thing is we're working with Fly Humboldt and Gregg, and we're working with our local tourism and marketing groups. We've had some really great momentum putting people together in rooms where they're working on this project and we're working on this project and we're working on this project, and how can we all work together for the greater good of our community. So those are just some of the projects that we've been working on in the last 2.5 months related to Project Soar. And we're really excited. I'm interested in having, is there information on the industry promotion pieces? Yes, we will get that to you. It's not quite finished, but we want people to market at the airport, and we're opening up a space for it, and we're going to let you know. One of the other things that we are working on currently too, one of the questions was that people are asking about a retail commercial space. There may be a possibility to do a pop-up retail space in the airport, and we're looking at what does that look like. Space is pretty limited in Terminal 1, which is the only terminal, but as part of the aviation TAP team, which is happening, and Gregg mentioned it, creating a master plan for the airports, all airports. The Humboldt County has, what, Gregg, 6? I think we run 6 airports, doing a master plan for all 6 airports, and then eventually Project Soar will leave ACV and work on other airports and other opportunities there, but we're starting with ACV. It's not that we're trying to, we just can only focus on so much, and ACV is our main terminal, and so we want to make sure to get the services there that they need and then be able to move on. And it's all about our local businesses. It's all about what Humboldt County has to offer in our rep. And so it's really an exciting project to be a part of. It was inspiring yesterday to hear Senator McGuire talk about tourism and travel. And it felt like that was a lot of the conversation yesterday. And it made me really excited to be part of Project Soar. And I appreciate our Economic Development Department really seeing that vision of Economic Development Department needs to help aviation. And I know Gregg's been saying it for maybe 18 years. And so it feels good to have it working. And I'm excited to be a part of it. And I'm excited to hear Adam and his, what he's doing and how he's got to Humboldt or Del Norte. But we appreciate this conversation. So maybe
there's a couple things in the chat that I can.
That's Project Soar. I'm here. I'm available. I'm accessible, and we want to hear from you, and we want to help. So let us know what we can do, and we'll jump off this.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Adam?
Yeah, I'm curious to I want to address a couple of things in the chat. So first, apropos of focusing on one airport at a time, I think it is really useful to think about all of them as a system. Yuma suggested something I thought was very clever, which is to use Neeland, which is generally above the cloud layer for the beginners, and Arcata for the more advanced spots. And it's something that, for example, Del Norte doesn't have the same luxury. There are 3 airports in Del Norte, but 2 of them you'd be out of your mind to train students in because they're in the middle of
You're almost out of your mind just to use them in general.
Yeah. I wouldn't attempt a landing at either of them. So the other thing, it's Andrew's brought up some really, really important points about transportation equity and sustainability. And so obviously the theme of today's session is about airports, so I'm interested in transportation modes of all kinds. I've actually never owned a car in my entire life. I've lived in San Francisco for 10 years, now live in Los Angeles mostly, and get around walking, biking, taking the bus, taking the subway, and it works great for me. And I also, am a pilot. It's just a weird contradiction, but I think the reality is that we do need to think about all modes of transportation. Today's focus is primarily on aviation. And so I wanted to talk about the other thing that Andrew brought up, which is really important and doesn't get addressed enough, which is to what extent is aviation a contributor to economic displacement through gentrification, and to what extent is it a result? It's sometimes both. One thing I think that's very important to know is that right now, well, at least as of the second quarter of this year, Arcata was actually one of the absolute most expensive airports to fly in and out of in the entire United States. So the average fare, this is published by the Department of Transportation, the average airfare in and out of all of the airports in the United States, round trip, was $300. The average airfare in and out of Arcata was $511 as of Q2 of this year. So that puts it in the most expensive 6% of airports in the United States. So right now, prior to, the flights to Burbank and the flight to Reno and all that stuff, the incumbent airlines in Arcata were basically milking their profitable position. They're saying, hey, no one else is going to come here, so we can charge whatever we want. And that actually made it so that flying was a luxury. One of the most luxurious things, the most luxurious airports in terms of cost in the entire country. And I think that that's terrible, right? There's a lot of people who don't have $500 to fly in and out of Arcata, whether they're living in the community and leaving, or whether they're trying to visit from somewhere else. It just can't work if flying, commercial flight is inaccessible to the general public.
What's interesting is in our air service development, we got a big grant, and we would, one of the reasons we got this grant from the FAA was that pricing issue, especially with an incumbent airline that was just the single. And going back to where we talked about, what our relationship with the airport is with the airlines, people would say to us, you need to tell them to, if they want to fly here, they need to lower their prices. And so, well, and especially, we can't do that, right? Any government entity walk into any business and say, we demand you lower your prices. Of course not. But the other thing was, and we heard this all the time, and it reminds me of that old Yogi Berra quote that no one ever goes there because it's always too crowded. And we would say, well, look, they're 80-90% full. They are in that sweet spot of having very full aircraft and very high fares. Who are we to, how would we convince them to, and I would say this to business owners because we'd hear this a lot. I go, okay, I'm coming into your business. You're selling everything you have for $5, but I come in and I say, I want to buy it for $1. What are you going to do? You're going to say, no, it's $5. I can sell it for $5. So our goal then, of course, was we had 2 goals, reliability and pricing. And so reliability, our effort was to get additional hubs, the LAs and the Denvers. Still, pricing was an issue because we only had 1 incumbent carrier. So we were also recruiting other carriers. So now we have the Americans, and then we got 2 low-cost carriers now, the Avelo to Burbank and Las Vegas and AHA to Reno. And I'm hopeful that as 3rd and 4th quarters come in, And we should have we can get that data. We get it quarterly, and it's usually 3 or 4 months behind. We can start to see that pricing also work. But I tell you, it's great for airport recruiting when you can sit down with a potential new airline and you go, we have a tremendous amount of leakage, which means people traveling from Humboldt County and flying outside of other airports. So we know we have market to capture. And in our case, the last leakage study we did, we found that 75% of the people in Humboldt County that were flying from other airports. We were only keeping 25%. So we knew there was market to capture. We knew there's an extremely high yield and not a lot of competition. So, that was a great pitch to the airlines, and it was kind of an easy sell. So we went there. Andrew, I'm going to push back a little bit. Go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I was just going to add another sort of anecdote of this that's kind of interesting. So one of the things that airlines do is that they sort of try to conquer territory, right? You can think of it like a game of Risk. And as long as they can hold on to a territory without competition, they do the minimum possible to do it. They keep just a few flights and they charge as much as possible. And I mean, that is the history of Arcata. But what's happening is that, once competition starts to build up, the airlines are forced to respond. And I think a good example of this is what's happened in Santa Rosa. So Santa Rosa was just Alaska. I mean, United had like a flight, right? That Santa Rosa was just, Alaska was just milking the market, which, they're a private company. They're going to do what they can to make as much money as possible. Boom. One day they start getting competition. Same airline, actually, that's now flying from Arcata to Burbank. And guess what? Alaska has to respond. So Alaska is now flying their own flight from Santa Rosa to Burbank, which makes no sense from a route network perspective. I mean, it's like they're just trying to keep their hold on the market. And I suspect that if United's smart, what they're going to do is they're going to see these 100+ people a day flying from Arcata to Burbank, and they're saying, hey, they're stealing some of our Arcata to LA folks, and they're going to add a second flight to LA. I mean, I hope so, because I live here. That'd be awesome.
Right. Yeah.
But this is how we get fares to come down, is we get new airlines to come in to fly to destinations, ideally new destinations, but also ideally destinations that are already served or, competitive, like Burbank and LAX, right? And then over time, the airlines realize the only way that they're going to be able to keep their share in this market is by lowering their fares. And so hopefully with time, we can solve Andrew's problem of it being as expensive to fly from Arcata to San Francisco as San Francisco to Boston. I'll go one step further. I mean, to talk about what Yuma was saying, it can actually be as expensive to fly from Arcata to San Francisco as it is to fly from San Francisco to London.
Right.
Because there's competition on San Francisco to London. And right now, there's the only meaningful competition from Arcata to San Francisco is the flight from Crescent City to Oakland. But it's far enough away that most people won't do that. Right. So, maybe with time, we can get, some competition to the Bay Area as well and bring those fares down.
And it's kind of, as someone who's been doing this for so long up here, it's kind of nice to all of a sudden, have those discussions where it's like, and the airlines are funny, right? They're not the most creative creatures on the planet, right? Because we've been making the same argument for 20 years about why to fly in here. And they go, oh, yeah, we think so. Okay. And you get a network planner and they'll look at their data and they look backwards, never forwards. And you're like, well, yeah, but, here are the market conditions. And we're such a small market, we don't get a lot of study from them. And so we have to do the work for them. But what happens in the airline industry, and it's especially pronounced now because basically it got wiped out. I mean, we basically hit the reset button in March and April of 2020, right? Is they're really worried about what the other airline knows. And so when an airport gets an announcement, all of a sudden, we're getting contacted from other airline. Oh, maybe they know something we don't know. What's going on over there? And so it's kind of funny that competition begets competition. Andrew, on your housing thing, I agree, right? That the gentrification as a result of economic growth is a real issue, and we have a real housing issue here, and something that we talk about all the time. I would not, however, I don't want to get to the point where we're saying, well, we need to stop down our efforts to create economic opportunity because of the increase in housing prices. I think what we need to do is address housing, because where does that end? Does it end when we say, okay, well, we're not going to encourage the Polytechnic, or we don't want Nordic Aqua Farms, or we don't want Wing Inflatables getting their contract from the Department of Defense? I mean, there's a lot going on economically here right now. That is pushing that, not just the airport. In fact, I think the airport's kind of a laggard in some ways, because some of these things are occurring, before we're really creating a lot of that kind of same growth. So I'm going to push back a little bit on that and say that's an argument that you got to watch out for, because they'll put all of us in economic development out of business, right? And Maya mentions the McKinleyville residents expressing concern, and that's, I understand, and I don't want to be, dismissive of that. But I will note what I noted earlier is we actually have fewer departures now than we've had in 2005, and it's right around there when we were really at our peak. And this is a hard thing about airports, right? When the Arcata Airport began commercial service, the McKinleyville population was 50 people. And that was in 1947, and so it's hard when we have something that's and it was built out in the boonies, right, at Dow's Prairie. If you look at those old pictures, there's just some farms around, and slowly the town grew up around the airport. And so I think it's really important that when we talk about McKinleyville growth and stuff like that, the airport does need to show what the economic benefit is, and people are really benefiting from that. And I agree totally that we need a much better public education campaign around that. And I would, I think the county should do that. It's not a REDEC thing necessarily. REDEC had a very specific role in air service development. Was we marketed our airport to the airlines. That was what we do. Those other things, because it is still a county facility, right? And but I agree completely. And Florence mentions about opening up our transportation with Avelo, and I think that's great. Avelo has allowed us to get to the Los Angeles basin on a pretty cheap flight. And so people really think, oh, well, we can get people from Burbank to come here and visit and all that. But you think about all the students. I think it was about 40% of the students from Humboldt State University are from Southern California, and they never really had an inexpensive way to get there, and now we can. So I think that also benefits those students, and Humboldt State in general, not to mention the movie industry and all that good stuff. But it is making it more accessible to people who don't have the money necessary to have the luxury experience. They get so
great. Maybe I can expand then on there were, I think it was Yuma made a couple comments about Europe. So I think the Europe, tourism angle is underappreciated, and also the Asia tourism angle. I remember seeing the first time I saw like a tour bus of Chinese tourists in Prairie Creek Redwood National Park, and I thought, people from other countries have finally realized that this is a great thing. And actually, I used to serve on the U.S. Travel and Transportation Advisory Board, advising the Department of Commerce. And the number one, category of places that people from outside the U.S. visit when they come here are the big cities: New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Disney World, things like that. But a close number two are the national parks. It's a huge draw for international visitors. And, the Grand Canyon is far and away the biggest, but I think we can make the Redwoods a major destination for international travelers. Now, right now, that's very difficult unless you're doing it as part of a much bigger tour, right? I mean, you can get to Switzerland in one stop from Arcata through San Francisco, but one, we all know that those flights, the flights from Arcata to San Francisco are the first to get canceled and delayed if there's any weather in San Francisco, which is often. And secondly, you're kind of going out of your way, right? I mean, you're going south to go mostly back north again. And that's true whether you're going to Europe or Asia. Gregg hinted earlier there's a possibility of air service, going to the north. If we could get a flight to Seattle, for example, it would make a huge difference. for being able to get to Europe and especially to Asia.
Yeah.
And all of the good new entrants that we're seeing, with, for example, Avelo, that's great if you're going to Burbank or if you're going to Las Vegas. It's great. But as of right now, and this may change, those new entrant airlines don't have onward ticketing to other airlines. So you can fly from Las Vegas to London, for example, but you'd have to buy a separate ticket. And if your first flight's delayed or canceled, you'd be out of luck.
And if you're checking bags, you'd have to go out of security.
You have to go out and do it again.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't generally think of Europe and Asia as being north because they're not, right? They're east and west from California. But because of the curvature of the Earth, you actually do fly almost directly over Seattle. I
was having this conversation at a party the other day, and someone said, "Where's that plane going?" So I took my FlightAware out on my phone, and I said, "Oh, that's going to Peking." And they're like, "Well, why is it going north?" I said, "Well, the shortest way to get to Peking is over the top."
So the shortest way. I mean, I don't foresee a day where there's going to be nonstop commercial flights to Europe. I mean, there could be private jets flying at some point, but if you were to trace it on a map, the shortest distance from the North Coast to both London and to Tokyo takes you more or less directly over Seattle and Vancouver. I mean, within a few hundred miles. Yeah. So that will make a huge difference. And I hope that happens soon. And I hope that it happens on an airline like Delta or Alaska that's got those international connections. Because if it's on Avelo, I mean, it's great. We'd have a connection to the Northwest. I would celebrate that. But I'd be throwing a party if we had a connection, a flight that could connect to international.
Our discussions are with an airline that does start with the letter A, but it's not Avelo. But I want to show something real quick. Just the little map I put together for. Can everybody see that? So this is basically our market right now, right? The Denver and all of this. So these are our destinations. Now I actually put this together before we put Reno in. So now we have Reno, but Reno's not a huge MSA, metropolitan statistical area. But when you think about it, we now have, and especially if we add Seattle, it would be great to get the Seattle or Portland. And Seattle really, I think, is what we're talking about now. That, we will have well over 33 million people within 3 hours by flight, and that's block time, gate to gate, to Humboldt County. And so one of the things, that I've been positing and pursuing with both the county and the Tourism Bureau folks is we've just opened up conveniently a whole bunch of markets. How do we get those, what are we doing to get those people to come in here and connect? And again, these are the populations, the big hubs, of course, on here, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Denver. So there's obviously a big network connection there. Again, Las Vegas and Burbank, we don't have interline agreements. We don't have code shares, which are, agreements between airlines to use the same ticket, or if not the same ticket, at least they'll do interline agreements where they'll at least move your baggage for you and that kind of thing. So, we really are, while we talk about our destinations, we're talking about a bigger network issue when we're talking about the larger airlines. But this is pretty exciting because, really you couldn't, for most people, getting to Humboldt County was a multiple flight through San Francisco or driving, right? And so now, again, we can tell someone in Denver or Phoenix, you want to go to the beach? Come to Humboldt County. You can go to a nice uncrowded beach or go see some beautiful redwoods, and you'll be here in less than 3 hours. Some of them commute that every day. So, that's not so bad. And when it's 125 or 120 degrees in Phoenix, on the coast, it's 65, 70 here. And then if you want to get heat, you drive inland and go sit on a beautiful river where it's maybe 90 or 100. But so I think we've got a real challenge now. And again, that's the challenge I've really put before the county and the tourism folks is, okay, we've got it. Now, what are you going to do to get people on the flights and using it? Because if you don't use it, we lose it. If they lose money, they're gone. Someone said, it's like you've attracted this industry, this business. I don't care if it's a supermarket or a manufacturer or what. We've attracted them here, But the thing about that business, it leaves every day. So we have to convince them to bring back their business every single day, right?
That's right.
Because it's really easy. And those planes don't have to come back. And to wind down a station means you send another truck up here, you load all the equipment up. The contractor, because like United and Avelo and American and AHA are all brands. None of the employees at the airport work for them. They work for SkyWest, Trago, Dugan, and Envoy, which are contractors to the airlines to provide those services. And so it's really easy for an airline just to pull up and leave. And we saw that with Avelo. In the first month, they pulled out of 2 markets right away, Grand Junction and Bozeman. And then they did a couple of more announcements and then pulled those announcements back before they even started service, because they saw that there wasn't flight service, demand in those markets. Interestingly, that's what Allegiant really started doing when they first started, and of course, not surprisingly, the founder of Avelo was a co-founder of Allegiant, and they would make route decisions weekly, and not just schedule decisions, but actual station decisions. And we're like, oh, it's not working, pull out. And it's a very flexible model. The big majors can't quite do that yet, but. So Susan asked if we wanted airplane mechanics. We do need airplane mechanics. It wouldn't necessarily be for these commercial flights, but what's called an A&P, airframe and power plant mechanics are in demand everywhere. But most, you can do some light maintenance here, but most of these airlines will have maintenance bases at their base, where they base their operations out of. Where they have all their spare parts and all that. So what they do often, and this is the problem, is, if we do have a mechanical here, they will fly up their mechanic and parts on another, either a ferry plane or a next scheduled plane to get them here. But they'll use their own mechanics, and so there's probably not enough business for a mechanic to be the SkyWest mechanic based here. But we certainly do. I mean, I think we really only have one A&P mechanic in all of Humboldt County, and that's at Murray Field. And so, people are getting maintenance done elsewhere. He's a great mechanic, but he's just one guy. So we do need that, and especially if we are going to want to grow the general aviation piece of our system, we need to have all those support services in place, and we really don't right now. Our FBOs are not really full service. The private facility out at Murray is just not attractive, and so we need a lot of work on that general aviation side. I'm gonna let Florence in. Any other questions? I agree, Maya. If I get it, you got to buy me a drink.
Yeah, and Seattle's the international connect, and both are great. Yeah, Seattle's going to be transformative in a way. Once we can get that. I'll also say, regarding the general aviation thing, so this is just another little point of comparison. So I flew into San Luis Obispo a few months ago. They just built a brand new, effectively private terminal. That has connotations that it's all movie stars and celebrities. I flew in there in a single propeller plane, paid, $15 to land. I was not some, high roller rolling in there, but man, the terminal is gorgeous. They've got snacks. They've got, views of the runway. They've got mechanics. If you've got an issue, they can give you oxygen if you're going to be flying at high altitude. All this amazing sort of service, and they're marketing themselves as, hey, keep your plane based here in San Luis Obispo, and ferry it to your clients in the Bay Area or in LA when they need to fly to Asia. But you can park it here in San Luis Obispo for much cheaper.
Right.
And I thought, wow, that's such an interesting idea. I mean, it's basically a remote parking lot, but they make good money from it. And I don't know if that's, makes sense in the North Coast, but the sort of bigger point here is that pilots sometimes have a choice of where they fly.
Absolutely.
They're flying for fun. They're flying for, they're flying their family somewhere. And a bunch of my friends are pilots, and there's certain draws to the North Coast, that the environment, all of those sorts of things, is just amazing. And there's actually no real service for pilots at all. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, Crescent City, which is a fraction of the size, actually has a place that pilots can sit and hang out and grab a snack and plan their flight and whatever. And there's nothing equivalent at Arcata, at least specifically. I've not flown into Murray Field or Neyland or any of the others.
Oh, there's nothing. I mean, yeah.
As well, yeah.
Well, one of the problems we have again is we really let the physical plant of our airports decline, unfortunately, over time, and in my opinion, unnecessarily. And so, if we're trying to attract a person who wants to base an aircraft here that is also trying to bring their business here, we really don't have anything to offer them except for really decrepit old hangars and all that. And quite honestly, I'm a marketing guy in the sense. I've worked in that industry for a while, and it's like your packaging sucks, right? Your product looks terrible, and so you create that. If your physical plant looks bad, then you create this connotation and to your target market that these guys really are second rate. If you come in and everything's rusty and there's grass growing in the tarmac and then the ramp and there's grass going down the runway and you're like, boy, these guys are rank amateurs. I'm not going to fly into here. So we have a lot of work. Susan, there is a public bathroom at Murray. There isn't one in Garberville, and there is a small pilot's lounge, etc. That if you have the key or a code, you can get into at Ronerville. But again, those support.
Well, you can also walk to the social club from Samoa.
Right, and Samoa, which is not owned by the county, but yeah, that's Samoa.
Oh, okay.
That's owned by the city of Eureka. But you're right. That was great. We financed the Humboldt Bay Social Club, and so I was super excited when that came up, and
awesome,
like, oh, good,
awesome
we get to do something at an airport. So.
Yeah, so just as it relates to this, I'd share a personal experience because I think this ties together some of the things that we were talking about before and some of the points that Andrew made as well. So you really want to think about all of these systems: the transportation, the economic development, the infrastructure, the customers, the economic impact, the displacement. You really want to think about it all together because the job training, there's a way to make the airports just contribute to the overall well-being of everyone in the community, providing new high-paying jobs, providing an opportunity for companies that are doing innovative things like aquaculture to base themselves there, tech companies that are environmentally conscious. I'm on the board of one of these companies on the East Coast. There's all these people who are doing great things that cross, all these different domains. You can create economic opportunity and contribute to the well-being of society and the environment and all of those things. But there's also so many places where that's true. You could base yourself in Bend. You could base yourself in Santa Cruz. You could base yourself in San Luis Obispo. I mean, you could base yourself in any number of these places, and they're all, offering great infrastructure. And the commercial infrastructure commercial aviation infrastructure in Arcata is actually great. If you were a passenger on one of these flights, you'd have no idea that there's grass growing out of the runway. You'd have no idea that the pilots are walking through a rusty gate in order to get onto the tarmac. But it's the truth. That's what's going on. And so, overall, I think there's such great trends that we're seeing in terms of the demand from airlines. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. And if we really want to make this a great center for economic growth and for opportunity for people who live here and who are going to be visiting, we need to address all the different pieces. We need to upgrade the infrastructure. We need to add flights to the north. We need to increase the flights to the south. We need to, make the airport really nice for people who are visiting for the first time. We need to create ground transportation that's easy, that doesn't involve, owning your own car. We need to make Uber and Lyft good. We need to make it so that when you go and grab a rental car, they actually have the car that you've reserved and they're not running out of it. I mean, all of these different pieces just create a more reliable infrastructure so that people feel like, okay, this is a first-rate destination that really cares about, the community and the economic opportunity. This is a good place for me to base my company and create some new jobs. That's where, that's one of the things that got me excited about investing myself in the area. And I think we're on the right track, and I'm very excited to see how this plays out over the next few years.
Florence asked the question about, if not mechanics, what other support positions are needed? What are the discussions at HSU? Certainly we can do ground schools. There are bachelor's degrees in aviation management. I mean, that's where a lot of the people that come out into the aviation industry, they go to somewhere like the University of North Dakota, which is where Cody went, which has a great aviation program and operations, security, all of that stuff. And then there's private places like Embry-Riddle, which has a small college in Daytona and one in Prescott. If you look at who's in the industry, a lot of those people go through those programs. And again, you can work in almost, I mean, the great thing about aviation is we think pilots and people that move stuff around, but the support structure and all that other stuff that has to be done is really amazing. Even real estate management, right, is really important. So I think there's a lot around that can be done. And there's a AAAE, which is the Airport Association of Airport. Anyway, it's the Airport Administrators and Association, professional organization, and they actually do American Association of Airport Executives. Got it. Okay, there we go. I knew it'd break itself loose from the crusty, calcified brain. But they actually do certifications, which there's one called a CM and one's called a AE. And so, you get those, you take a test to get that, and you get your professional certifications. You do that. There's ACEs. There's a real ecosystem that's really robust around that. And quite honestly, you can work anywhere in the country right now if you have those kind of aviation certifications and management. The airlines are hiring, airports are hiring, all sorts of stuff. One thing that, and so we're talking a lot about development and being entrepreneurial, and I've been a critic of that approach, and I'm glad to see that the county is now looking at this as the economic development asset. I used to be chair of the Aviation Advisory Committee here a decade ago, and we were just saying we got to be more entrepreneurial. We got to deal with this, and quite honestly, the county didn't view it that way. To be honest, and I think we've got to change and some progress in there. Interesting, what they did in Crescent City was they had the same problem. And they started a Joint Powers Authority to run the airport, which is, that organization just is focused on running the McNamara Field, the airport in Crescent City. And as a result, when they did that, they took a much more business-like approach. They were not bound by county processes, which quite honestly is a very freeing thing. And so they were able to do a lot of stuff up there. They do have Contour Airlines that runs up there. They get a federal subsidy to do that, but new terminals, and they have a great FBO. I mean, if you want to go up and see what a nice, and it's a tiny airport, right? It's much smaller than us. But if you're a general aviation pilot flying into there, you're going, oh, this is way nicer than certainly Humboldt or Murrayfield, and it's a smaller airport. So we've got, I mean, it's a huge lift. And to be honest, our system has been neglected for so long that the answers are not going to be quick, but we needed to do it. Now, and we're almost out of time. I don't know if there was anybody here from Mendocino County, but that's kind of interesting. They don't have a commercial airport, but they have a number of general aviation airports, two of which are privately owned. One's a private, and one's a public airport that's privately owned. Boonville CSD owns one. City of Willis owns one, and Ukiah and I think Covelo are owned by the county. So I don't know if there's anybody here from Mendocino County, but if there is, my suggestion and what we do here is we just make sure that airport system is in the economic development planning as a key component. We're down to.
I've landed at Ukiah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've landed at Ukiah, and I mean, boy, that needs some maintenance. There was grass in the runway. I actually felt kind of unsafe landing there. This was a few years ago.
Yeah. That's KUKI, and a lot of that, that's they're flying a lot of air tankers out of there. I noticed it's always fun when there's a fire around there. You can see the air tankers taking off and on. Okay, a couple more minutes. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at Gregg at redeck.com, or Diana Rios, and we have our in the profiles our contact information. I think the conference folks will be sending that out as well. Clearly, Adam and I love this topic. We could probably talk about this all day, but
yes, we could.
I have to say that despite some of the challenges that we've had over the years, this is still the most fun part of my business, my work. And quite honestly, I think something that the potential that is coming with us before us right now because of some growth and other stuff is amazing. Oh, and Andrew put something about, years ago on the runway extension. So we do have a runway that's a little over 6,000 feet there was a study done when we did the big airport rebuild about 12 years ago. There was a study about how to get extra length. And the only way you can do that is by buying property and rerouting Central Avenue. And the public we felt, at the time, the county felt that the public was not going to support that. 6,000, we're a little over 6,000 by 150. That's not a huge runway. So, we're not going to be doing transcons and that kind of thing because you just can't get enough fuel on an aircraft.
You can. John Wayne does it at 5,700.
Well, that's true. John Wayne is shorter. So they do have some, but transcons with a few million people are easier.
Yes, that's right. There's going to be other reasons why there's no transcons,
exactly.
Which is that there aren't enough
exactly.
people that want to fly it yet.
But right, yeah, operationally you can do it. Flying out of John Wayne is always fun because you do those low power takeoffs on those. You always feel like you're floating on a kite until you get to the coast. But fun stuff. And yeah, we are. You're right. And I always point that out. We have a longer runway than Orange County, so don't sell us short on that.
No, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Adam. And we hope to see you when you come back up again. That'll be fun.
Yes, I'll let you know.
Great. We're going to put you to work. All right, good. Diana, Scott, if you're listening, thank you. It's now 11:45 and this session's ending. And I think we have you can go take some time and go to the expo hall, and then the next sessions start at 1 o'clock. So we'll see you then. Thank you, everyone.